October 1348. A market town in the south of England. The church bell has rung for funerals 4 times since sunrise, and it is not yet noon. On your street, 3 doors are marked and shut. The gravedigger is the busiest man in town, and he is charging triple. Within 1 year, half the people you have ever known will be gone. Forget the kings and the battles for the next 10 minutes. This is what it was actually like to wake up, work, eat, and try to stay alive through the deadliest year in human history. Start with the morning. Because the morning is where you would first understand how different this world already was. You wake before dawn on a straw mattress. In a 1-room house you share with your whole family, and in winter, some of your animals. There is no glass in the window, just a wooden shutter. The fire in the middle of the room has burned down to embers, and the smoke drifts up toward a hole in the thatch. Breakfast is coarse dark bread and weak ale. Everyone drinks ale, even children, because the water is not trusted, and in most towns it should not be. And here's the first thing to understand about 1348. Even before the plague arrived, life was already close to the edge. England had lived through years of failed harvests and cattle disease. Most people worked the land from first light to last, owed labor to a lord, and counted a bad harvest as a mortal threat. Then, in the summer of 1348, word began to move up the roads from the coast. A sickness had come off the ships at Melcombe in Dorset. People said it killed within days. People said prayers would stop it. People were wrong on the second count. The disease we now call the Black Death was bubonic plague carried by fleas that lived on rats, and rats lived everywhere people did. In its worst form, it moved through the lungs, passing straight from person to person on a cough. The first sign was often a swelling in the armpit or groin, hard and dark and painful, called a bubo. Then fever, then black blotches under the skin. From first swelling to the grave could be 3 days. A person could share your table on Sunday and be buried by Thursday. Now walk the street at midday, because the street is where the fear lived. The town you are picturing probably has 2,000 people. 1 stone church and narrow lanes of packed mud where waste from houses and butcher stalls runs in an open channel down the middle. That was normal. Nobody in your world knows what a germ is. The best doctors in Europe, trained men from the universities, teach that the plague travels in poisoned air. A miasma brought on by the alignment of the planets. So the town's defenses are these: sweet-smelling herbs held to the nose, bonfires lit to cleanse the air, and church processions begging God for mercy. You would have watched neighbors carry a rose to the market instead of a mask. It was not foolishness. It was the entire knowledge of the age, applied with complete seriousness against an enemy no one could see. And yet the townspeople noticed things the theories could not explain. They noticed the disease raced through crowded houses. They noticed the ones who fled early to the countryside more often lived. Some ports in Italy began holding arriving ships at anchor to see if sickness appeared aboard. The waiting period eventually settled at 40 days, 40 giorni in Italian. That is where the word quarantine comes from. The instinct was right, 4 centuries before anyone could say why. Work did not stop for the end of the world, and this is the part most stories skip. The harvest of 1348 still had to come in, plague or no plague, because without it the survivors would starve by spring. So men and women went out to the same fields where yesterday's dead had worked beside them. Court records from English manors that autumn show the disaster in dry accounting lines. Rents unpaid because the tenant was dead, then the next tenant dead, then the next. In some villages, the mill stood silent because every miller in the family was gone. Animals wandered loose with no one left to herd them. One chronicler, Henry Knighton, recorded 5,000 sheep dead in a single pasture, rotting where they fell, because there was no one to tend them. Inside the towns, the worst job in the world had to be done by someone. The dead were collected by cart, often at night, by men paid wages nobody else would take. The churchyards filled in weeks. Then the towns did what no one had imagined doing. They dug trenches, blessed the ground, and buried their people in layers. In London, archaeologists have since uncovered these emergency cemeteries. The skeletons laid close together, but carefully, side by side, facing east. Even at the bottom of the catastrophe, someone took the time to lay each body straight. That detail says more about these people than any chronicle. Here's the question that hung over every household. Why us? Most concluded it was punishment for sin. Some joined processions of penitents who whipped themselves through the streets. Others decided that if the end was coming, they would spend it in the tavern. A priest named William of Dean wrote with disgust that people were seizing pleasure while they could. Both reactions came from the same place. Every rule these people had lived by said the world was ordered and watched over, and the world had just stopped making sense. By the spring of 1350, the Great Dying had burned through. The numbers are hard to hold in your head. England is thought to have lost around half its population. Across Europe, somewhere between 1/3 and 1/2, tens of millions of people in about 4 years. There was no family untouched. Whole villages simply ceased to exist, and you can still find their outlines today. Low grassy humps and English fields marked on maps as deserted medieval villages. But here is the twist the people of 1348 could never have seen coming. For the ones who survived, the world got better. So much labor had vanished that the survivors could, for the first time in their lives, name a price for their work. A plowman who had been bound to one lord's fields could now walk to the next manor and be welcomed. Wages in England roughly doubled within a generation. Parliament passed law after law trying to freeze pay at old levels, and the laws failed because the arithmetic of the graveyard beat the arithmetic of the lords. Peasant families ate more meat, wore better cloth, and negotiated their way out of ancient obligations. Historians still argue about how much the Black Death shaped the end of serfdom in England, but the direction is not in doubt. The most terrible year anyone had ever lived through quietly loosened a system that had held their grandparents in place for centuries. The people of 1348 never learned what had actually killed half their world. The plague bacillus was not identified until 1894, 5.5 centuries too late for them. They faced the worst thing in human history without ever knowing its name, and they still brought in the harvest, still buried their dead facing east, still rebuilt. The next time you pass an old church with a wide green churchyard, remember that the ground may be higher than the street around it. In many English towns, that rise is 1,348, still visible under the grass. If you had been there, do you think you would have fled to the countryside or stayed with your town? Tell us in the comments, and if you want to walk through another century most people only read about, subscribe. Next time, we step inside a place the Victorians built for their poor, and it was feared more than prison.